Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the opening ceremony of the Sejong Youth Forum. My name is Siwon. 포럼에 참가하신 여러분 안녕하세요. 반갑습니다. 저는 박시원입니다.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I would like to express my gratitude to students in Sejong and overseas participants for joining us today. We are at the International Center, Hwangik University. My name is Ha-jun, and nice to meet you all. 세종과 회의에서 참가해주신 여러분들 반갑습니다. 이하준입니다.
Are you enjoying exciting summer holidays? I'm having a great summer vacation and so happy to be able to meet you through this forum. The theme of the forum this year is Our Planet Matters. 세종의 최초 국제 청소년 포럼을 통해 여러분을 만날 수 있어서 기쁩니다. 이번 토론의 주제는 소중한 우리 지구입니다.
Through this forum, we are going to talk about how young people can unite for environmental issues and what we can do in our lives for the future. 이번 포럼은 미래 사회를 함께 준비하기 위해 환경 문제에 대해 청소년들이 어떻게 함께 연대하고 삶에서 실천할 것인가에 대해 함께 논의하게 됩니다.
Have you ever heard of the phrase, "We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our next generation"? In the face of ongoing climate change, which is now known as the climate crisis, I think we all agree that there is little time left for us to get everything back to normal. 빌려 쓰는 지구라는 말 다들 들어보셨죠? 기후 위기를 정상으로 되돌릴 수 있는 시간이 얼마 남지 않았습니다.
I hope that the 3 days at the Sejong Youth Forum will be a valuable time for all of us to get inspired and express our voices. 세종국제청소년 포럼을 통해 많이 배우고 우리 목소리를 낼 수 있는 시간이 될 수 있기를 바랍니다.
Then we will officially announce the opening of the 2021 Sejong Youth Forum. 2021년 세종 국제 청소년 포럼을 시작하겠습니다.
The forum will be started by the welcoming remarks by Mr. Choi Gyo-jin, the Governor of Education of Sejong City. 먼저 최교진 교육감님께서 환영사를 하시겠습니다.
여러분 안녕하세요. 반갑습니다. 뜻깊은 자리에 함께해 주신 세종시와 해외 여러 도시의 청소년 여러분을 진심으로 환영합니다. 지난 2년은 코로나19로 인한 격동기였습니다. 전 세계적인 감염병으로 평온했던 우리 일상은 많은 불편함과 제약이 생겼습니다. 우리는 숨을 쉬고 친구를 만나고 학교를 다닐 수 있는 일상의 평화가 얼마나 소중한지 알게 되었고, 우리 가족과 이웃, 나아가 저 멀리 다른 국가에 사는 이들과 함께하는 공존의 삶이 얼마나 소중한 것인지 깨달을 수 있었습니다. 청소년 여러분, 코로나 상황으로 인한 제약 속에서도 오늘 지구촌에 발생하고 있는 환경 문제에 대해 지구촌 공동체의 주인으로서 주체적으로 고민하고 함께 실천할 방안을 찾아보기 위해 청소년 포럼을 개최하게 되어서 기쁩니다. 미래학자인 제레미 리프키는 인류가 초래한 기후변화가 지구의 생물종을 6번째 대멸종의 위기로 몰아가고 있으며 인류에게 주어진 시간이 얼마 남지 않았다고 지적하면서 지구 생명체를 구하기 위해서는 온실가스 배출량을 줄이는 삶으로 대전환이 이루어져야 한다고 강조했습니다. 한국의 경우에 작년에 시도교육감협의회에서 기후위기 환경재난시대 학교 환경교육 비상선언을 선포했습니다. 이를 계기로 학생의 환경학습권 보장과 학교 교육과정과 연계한 환경교육 활성화에 대한 기본적인 틀이 갖추어졌습니다. 현재 세계 각국의 정책 입안자와 교육자들은 환경재난의 심각성을 깨닫고 우리 모두의 미래를 위해서 학교 교육이 달라져야 한다고 주장합니다. 그러나 저는 환경 문제에 대해서만큼은 교육과 학습만으로는 부족하다고 생각합니다. 환경재난의 시대에 어린이와 청소년은 기후변화의 영향을 가장 많이 받게 될 세대이기 때문에 조금 더 적극적으로 자신의 목소리를 내야 합니다. 적극적이고 주도적으로 환경 문제에 개입하고 결정의 주체가 되고 그 결정대로 실천할 수 있어야 합니다. 청소년 여러분, 전 지구적으로 닥친 환경재난의 문제는 선택이 아닌 모든 세대가 감당해야 할 기본적인 책무이고 우리의 지속적인 행동을 통한 실천이 가장 중요합니다. 그런 측면에서 세종국제청소년포럼은 여러분의 생각을 공유하고 고민을 나누고 결론을 도출할 수 있는 좋은 기회가 될 것입니다. 모쪼록 3일간 포럼을 통해서 함께 생각하고 소통하고 삶으로 실천할 수 있는 시간이 되시기 바랍니다. 세종국제청소년포럼으로 말미암아 청소년 여러분이 삶에 대한 태도와 지향점을 새롭게 설정하는 계기가 되었으면 좋겠습니다. 우리들의 작지만 힘찬 한 걸음이 새로운 공존과 상생의 시대를 여는 밑거름이 될 것을 믿어 의심치 않습니다. 여러분 고맙습니다.
좋은 말씀 감사합니다. Next, we would like to welcome Mr. Ban Ki-moon, the former UN Secretary General and the current chairman of the National Climate Council. Mr. Ban will give a congratulatory speech. 전 UN 사무총장이자 현 국가 기후환경회의 위원장이신 반 기문님께서 축하 인사를 하시겠습니다.
Thank you for your warm introduction. Dear students, global citizens, distinguished guests, it is my great honor and privilege to deliver these virtual remarks to you today on the occasion of the 2021 International Youth Forum. I take this opportunity to extend my deepest congratulations on the realization of this timely forum. Indeed, the 2021 International Youth Forum comes at an important time for all people and our planet. As the pandemic continues and the climate crisis worsens, we need global citizens from all around the world to step up and make their voices heard on the issues we face. Dear students, global citizens, distinguished guests, young people like you are at the very center of both the world's problems and the world's solutions. This is true on crucial issues that will define your future, including climate change, inequality, and global development. The climate crisis, particularly, is a global challenge demanding global solutions. And all of us, young and old, rich and poor, men and women, have a stake in finding sustainable solutions in response to it and pushing for more urgent climate action. Climate change respects no borders. Our actions must transcend all frontiers. The primary responsibility of governments and businesses is to cut their emissions and implement the Paris Climate Change Agreement. But there are individual actions we can all take too, and young people can lead these efforts. Don't waste water or electricity. Be aware of your consumption and carbon footprint. Learn more about supply chains and buy sustainable products. Recycle, compost, and help eliminate plastic waste. Take a sustainability pledge. Talk with your family, friends, and political leaders about the dangers of climate inaction. The climate crisis is here right now, and fighting it must be the driving task of your generation. We are all in this together. and the youth can lead global efforts in response. We don't have a plan B, simply because we don't have a planet B either. As such, I'm asking you to be the collective change makers of tomorrow. Act beyond your national borders and understand we are all global citizens. We all share a common destiny rooted in sustainability, peace, and co-prosperity. I have no doubt that you can save the earth. Thank you for your vital action to this end.
Thank you, Mr. Ben. Next, a celebratory performance is prepared for you. I heard that it is a co-project by students from Sejong Arts High School and the Meridian High in the United States. 다음은 축하 공연 순서인데요. 세종예술고등학교와 해외협력학교인 메리디안 고등학교와 함께한 프로젝트의 결과라고 들었어요.
네, 맞습니다. 두 학교는 환경을 주제로 지난 1년간 프로젝트를 함께 해왔는데요. We Can Change, We Can Live 라는 창작곡을 만들었다고 합니다. Students from both schools have been working on a project called Music Around the World for the past year, and they made a song called We Can Change, We Can Live with the theme of climate change.
I think the performance fits well with the topic of our forum. Let's see the congratulatory message from the teachers of both schools and the performance of Sejong Arts High School students. 그럼 양쪽 학교 선생님들의 축하 메시지와 공연을 함께 보시겠습니다.
It has been such a pleasure to collaborate on the very important topic of climate change with the Sejong Arts School. The future of our world is in our classroom. The opportunity to combine Eastern and Western traditions demonstrates that together we can create music which inspires change. It has been an unbelievable pleasure to work with Ms. Park, the coordinator of international education. The project continued to take shape and involved so many different parts. Thank you also to Ms. Youngju Park, the amazing music educator at Sejong. The Korean instruments brought our music so beautifully to life. Thank you for your beautiful adaptation. The students composed such impactful lyrics. I always thought the sun would shine forever, speaking to how climate change is so easily ignored. The effect on our planet in the lyrics, the water cries, plastic polluted tears. The piece is written in a minor key, but at the end, with the lyrics, we can change, we can live, it modulates to major, indicating there is hope if we work together and change now. We look forward to a continued partnership as we create bridges between all peoples. Thank you.
세종국제청소년포럼 개최를 진심으로 축하드립니다. 안녕하세요. 저는 세종예술고등학교 교사 박영주입니다. 기후변화 대응에 대한 주제를 가지고 미국 자매학교 학생들과 멋진 영상을 만들게 돼서 매우 기쁘게 생각합니다. 미국 자매학교로부터 처음 악보와 음원을 받았을 때 조금 낯설고 어려웠습니다. 이 곡을 어떻게 한국적인 곡으로 편곡하여 연주할 것인가, 이런 고민을 하면서 학생들과 함께 많은 자료를 찾아보게 되었고요. 자료를 찾아보는 그 때마다 정말 지구촌 곳곳에서 기후변화에 대해서 고통을 받고 있는 많은 사람들을 알게 되었습니다. 저희가 만든 홍보 영상은 두 가지 버전으로 되어 있습니다. 첫 번째는 미국 학생들이 연주한 관악 연주의 영어 가사로 노래하는 것. 두 번째는 우리나라 악기로 연주한 곡의 한국 가사로 노래하는 겁니다. 여기에 미숙 학생들이 기후변화에 대한 심각성을 알리고자 메시지를 담아 포스터를 제작했습니다. 학생들이 준비한 작은 퍼포먼스가 지구촌 곳곳에 울려 퍼져서 지구촌에 사는 모든 생명체들이 행복하게 살기를 희망합니다. 끝으로 멋진 프로젝트를 같이 해주신 조지 메이슨 하이스쿨 학생들과 MJ 선생님께 감사드립니다. 감사합니다.
Long sweet breath, heavy wind, breathing thick. Dying trees, oh, how the water is crying plastic tears. If we don't stop choking off the air, choking the earth, we will fear burning in the breeze. Burning breeze, terrified of how we could devour the seven seas out. Terrified of how we could devour the seven seas. Ah, spring is dying, let it haunt you. Long sweet grief, heavy wind, breathing thin, barren and dying trees. Oh, how the water is crying plastic tears. We can change it if we want it. The way is fair beneath the sun. How much longer do we have to last the way back to the shining fields where we always used to run? Spring is dying, let it haunt you, let it spear your lungs with grief. Heavy wind, breathing thin, barren earth and dying trees. Oh, time to stop, time.
The biggest problem, I think, is that the earth is getting hotter. The temperature is rising.
Thank you. That was amazing. I heard that increasing number of schools abroad are now collaborating with primary and secondary schools in Sejong. 세종의 학교와 프로젝트를 진행하는 해외 학교가 늘어나고 있다고 해요.
Yes, there are a total of 35 schools in Sejong practicing in-school international co-projects with schools abroad. This year, projects are being carried out with schools in 13 countries. The overseas participants we're meeting today are also the representative students of the school that is working on the project. 13개국 35개의 해외 학교와 수업 시간에 프로젝트를 함께하고 있고, 오늘 우리가 만나고 있는 해외 참가자들도 세종 파트너 학교의 대표 학생들입니다.
그렇군요. I hope that excellent projects will be carried out and active exchanges will occur in various fields. Next, there will be a keynote speech by Dr. Malcolm Fairbrother. He will give a speech on the theme of universal obligations for sustainability. 첫 번째 기조 연설은 말콤 페어브라더 박사님께서 하시겠습니다. 통역이 필요하신 분은 포럼 홈페이지에서 줌 링크를 클릭하시면 됩니다.
One of the things I've been most grateful for in my life has been the opportunity to see many beautiful places on this planet. Beaches, mountains, forests, rivers. To me, it's all magical. But aside from being magical, the earth is also the only place we have to survive. If we want to live, if we value any form of life, we are completely dependent on this planet. If you were in outer space, isolated on a spaceship, you would think a lot about how to protect it and how to make sure you don't run out of healthy food and clean water. Well, this planet is our spaceship in the vast, otherwise uninhabitable cosmos. The problem, the issue you are here to discuss, is that we're destroying this spaceship. We're changing its climate. We're creating and accumulating wastes that will take 1,000 years to decompose. We're taking over and transforming so much of the Earth's surface that other forms of life are disappearing. And while we don't know the role that every species plays in sustaining the web of life on this planet, we know those relationships are complex and they sustain us. In Western Canada, where I'm originally from, we just had a record-setting heat wave. One small town reached 49 degrees, and then the next day it was destroyed in a wildfire. Why is this happening, and what can we do about it? Until just the last couple generations, the number of people on Earth was much lower, and our lifestyles didn't have so much impact. Many people also lived more intimately with the land and with nature, and they were more aware of their impacts, so they were careful. In our industrial societies, we have developed many kinds of new technologies, and while lots of them are wonderful and make our lives better, many have also separated us from nature. We often haven't made enough of an effort to think about all the consequences of those technologies for the environment, for the planet, and even indirectly for ourselves. Of the billions of people on Earth, many are quite poor. Their modest standards of living don't generally have a big environmental impact. But the lifestyles of people in developed countries, like Canada or Sweden, where I live now, or the Republic of Korea, are having a big impact. Many people in these countries live in cities, and they have little conscious interaction with the natural systems on which we all depend. But even if we aren't aware of our impacts and of how much harm we're doing to our spaceship, the impacts are real, and they're causing a big problem. You might conclude, given what I just said, that what the big problem is the size of the world's human population, or the high standards of living that some of us, fortunately increasing numbers of us, are enjoying. But actually, I don't think so. I think that we, all the billions of people there are, can live on this planet, and we can live well. However, we need to live smarter. We need to develop new technologies, new ways of doing things, and new ways of organizing our lives. I believe that when we really try to solve environmental problems, we succeed. We just don't often actually try. It's easy to delay taking action, to leave these problems for the future, even though the longer we delay, the worse the crisis will get, and the higher the price of addressing it will be, sooner or later. How can I be so confident that we can tackle even the most serious environmental problems? I feel that way because I know we have solved serious environmental problems before. Let me tell you about some examples. First, acid rain. When I was around your age, coal-burning electricity plants, factories, and vehicles were emitting a lot of sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides. And these pollutants were changing the composition of our lakes, streams, and wetlands. This was hugely damaging to many species living in these aquatic environments. Plus, acid rain was damaging forests and even buildings. But at a certain point, regulations began requiring that electricity plants, factories, and vehicles burn cleaner fuels or remove acidic substances coming out of their smokestacks. Now, while the problem hasn't completely gone away, in many parts of the world, it's no longer a big issue. Second, lead. Lead exposure is hugely damaging, especially in childhood. It affects brain development a lot. No known level of exposure is safe. And this has been known for a long time. But lead has been considered a really helpful part of certain things, like fuel for cars or as an ingredient in house paints. But because of the terrible impact of lead on children's brain development, countries around the world introduced restrictions. In Korea, for example, a law to remove lead from gasoline was enacted in 1992. Now, we can measure the lead content of children's blood, and we know these restrictions have reduced the content of lead. People are literally smarter as a consequence. Third and last, green energy. Any source of energy is polluting in one way or another, coal, nuclear, oil, but the environmental impact of some is far less than for others. Solar and wind energy, for example, do very little harm, not zero, but not much. The problem is that until recently, they were expensive. If you wanted to generate electricity using these technologies, it cost you a lot more money than from polluting sources. But that's now changed. In a really short period of time, your lifetimes, the cost of generating electricity using these technologies has dropped massively. So now we can produce electricity cheaply for all the purposes we want in ways that do little harm to our planet. So what lessons can we learn from these success stories? I think we need to realize that we can solve the global environmental crisis. How did we stop making these problems worse? Basically, we found new, different ways of getting the things we wanted. Acid rain was largely caused by electricity stations burning coal, but it turned out to be pretty easy to clean those up. Lead was in house paint and vehicle fuel, but it didn't have to be. We used to need fossil fuels, but now we've found good substitutes. So the way I see it, we can easily stop making things worse and start making them better. Why aren't we doing that already? The big challenge with environmental problems is that they're social problems. We can only solve them by working together. But we're people. We always disagree. It's sort of in human nature. Think about when you do anything as part of a group. You talk, you make decisions. Maybe not everyone likes the decision, but if you are committed to the group and you trust each other, you cooperate. You do your part. If the system works, everyone benefits. Unfortunately, sometimes people don't cooperate or they break the rules. They don't trust each other. And when people don't trust each other, it's hard to work together. One of the most fundamental ways in which members of a society work together is that they write and obey laws. You may not always like the laws. Sometimes I don't agree with the laws. But when it comes to the environment, laws are, in fact, the only thing that will save us from ourselves, from the temptation to pollute and the tendency for people to leave others to clean up their mess. I'm a researcher, and in my research, I do surveys on how people around the world think about environmental problems. What I've found is that most people are worried and convinced that environmental problems are real and serious. They perceive correctly that the world is in trouble, but they don't know what to do about it. I believe one reason for their confusion is that they don't know about the kinds of success stories that I've just told you about. They don't know how effective existing environmental laws have been, and that we just need to make more such laws. As individuals, we need to live with integrity and conscientiousness, but fundamentally, we need our leaders to make more of an effort to guide societies in more sustainable directions. But our leaders won't act unless we demand that they do. It's vital that we make that demand, because when our leaders take the time and create smart rules for people to live by, we can and will solve these problems. So to you students from different parts of the world, for our sustainable planet, I ask that you do your part as an individual and be aware of your obligations as global citizens. Make efforts to build a better world and ask our leaders to do their parts. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fairbrother. I believe that we humans have solved problems that seemed impossible to solve before. I believe that we will surely solve this environmental crisis as we unite as one again with consciousness. Next, we'll meet Amy and Ella Meek.
두 번째 기조 연설자는 에이미와 엘라 미크입니다. Amy and Ella Meek are young environmental activists who have formed an organization called Kids Against Plastic. Please welcome Amy and Ella Meek.
I'm very sorry I can't be here to speak to you all today, but I hope you learn loads about the issues surrounding plastic pollution and feel motivated to do your bit, just like Amy and I were back in 2016 when we started Kids Against Plastic. At the time, we were 12 and 10 years old, and since then, we've been campaigning to tackle the immense issue of plastic pollution through a reduction in our usage of single-use plastic. In the 5.5 years we've been campaigning through our charity, we've encouraged more than 1,100 schools and many businesses, cafes and councils around the UK to become what we call plastic clever and be more discerning users of single-use plastic. We've picked up over 94,000 pieces of plastic litter out of our 100,000 goal and developed an app to log it. We've brought together a team of over 100 young people from around the world who we support in taking action against plastic pollution. And we've spoken at various locations around the UK and Europe about reducing plastic consumption, including all three parliaments in Great Britain, TEDx Exeter and the UN headquarters in Geneva. Today, Amy will give you a brief insight into the issue of plastic pollution, how we can all be involved in addressing it, and ultimately the importance of taking action for the planet now. Not tomorrow, not in a week or a month or a year's time, today.
When plastic was first invented, it was considered to be a wonder material. It was back in 1856 when plastic first entered the material scene in its most primitive form as parksein, the first human-made plastic. By the 1950s, after plastic was refined and altered into the polystyrenes, nylons, and polyethylenes, more similar to the plastics that we see today, throwaway living made possible by single-use plastics was celebrated as a sign of progress. Plastic was hailed as a kind of miracle. And it's easy to see why, because plastic is a unique material for a number of reasons. It's incredibly durable, whilst being light, malleable, and cheap to use. These properties meant that it could be used for a range of purposes, from stockings to cellophane. And even now, it's revolutionized our lives in many ways. It's made hospitals more sterile, it's given us almost unbreakable bowls, chairs, and many, many more household items. However, the properties that make plastic so good for these purposes are what make it so bad when we use plastic to make cheap, convenience, throwaway products, known as single-use plastics. We're taking an extremely durable, synthetic material that lasts for hundreds of years, and we're using it to make items that we use for just 10 minutes before discarding, like plastic bottles, drinks cups, and bags. Now, it's not rocket science to see why this mismatch of packaging and function is causing an environmental crisis that is rapidly spiraling out of control. Now, this durability of plastic is particularly worrying when plastic becomes a pollutant, because as I mentioned earlier, plastic in the natural environment never goes away. It just breaks down into increasingly smaller pieces called microplastics. Microplastics are pieces of plastic under 5 millimeters in size, and these microscopic pollutants are causing serious concern for marine biologists. Microplastics in the oceans are like sponges for chemicals, absorbing harmful pesticides and other persistent organic pollutants. A single piece of plastic can become up to 5 times more toxic than the water around it. Now, because of their minute size, microplastics are often ingested by marine wildlife, and microplastics are estimated to negatively affect 700 million marine species, with microscopic plankton even being found to eat tiny plastic fragments. And the concerns around microplastics go further than just the physical consumption of lots of indigestible plastic. The chemicals absorbed by plastics have been found to stunt growth in species like the European common crab, and the concentration of the chemicals contained in plastic can cause them to build up in organisms' guts, chemicals such as bisphenol A, which was banned in plastics due to its health concerns. The other issue with organisms like plankton, eating microplastics is that it links to a much larger environmental issue, the climate crisis. Now, plankton play a key role in the ocean carbon cycle. Phytoplankton photosynthesize and absorb carbon dioxide from the air, which they then store as carbon. And normally, this carbon-rich waste from phytoplankton, as well as their remains, will sink down to the seabed. But plastic makes this excretion more buoyant, which means that it sinks more slowly to the seabed, or it just doesn't sink at all. This means that there's more opportunity for the carbon that these remains stores to be released back into the atmosphere, instead of it being stored in a carbon sink. And plastic's impact on the climate crisis doesn't stop there. Plastic production itself has a huge carbon footprint. Most petroleum plastics, the type that we most commonly see on the shelves, are made from crude oil. That means that it's non-renewable, and we could well run out of it if we keep using it at current rates. Now, despite this, fossil fuels represent 99% of plastic's raw material base, which means that between 4 to 8% of global oil production is used just to make plastic, numbers which are only set to rise. Oil refinery is the second highest ranked sector in terms of greenhouse gas emissions per facility, behind only the power plant, meaning that plastic production also has a huge carbon footprint. And it's estimated that by 2050, plastic will be responsible for up to 13% of the world's carbon budget. Now, these fossil fuels companies don't want to stop producing this plastic despite its environmental impacts, because demand for oil for transport and energy production is falling as we all become more aware of the damage brought about by the climate crisis and try to lead more sustainable lives. So many of these oil companies are looking to plastic as the solution to their falling profits. After all, plastic is made from oil, so if they drive up plastic demand, they drive up their business. This is why 300 million tons of plastic waste is still produced each year. That's an enormous amount of rubbish, and almost half of it is just single-use plastics. Now, this volume of waste produced is a key reason why recycling of plastic is far from the solution. Because in theory, recycling is the perfect way to deal with our waste materials. In concept, recycling is just using old items like plastic bottles to make brand new plastic bottles again. But because so much of this plastic waste is single use, it's often too low grade and too flimsy to be recycled into a new product. The remaining plastic that can be recycled in theory, such as PET used to make plastic bottles, is instead often downcycled into an item composed of lower quality plastic than it was before. So, like making a plastic bottle into a carpet or a fleece. Now, this might sound like a great solution, but really it's far from that for two main reasons. Firstly, the downcycled items shed pollutants called plastic microfibers when they're washed or broken down by wear and tear. Microfibers are a really prolific form of almost invisible plastic pollution that act similarly to microplastics, which I mentioned, absorbing chemicals and interfering with food chains. And secondly, this downcycling still means that lots more plastic needs to be made just in order to replace that was used the day before. It doesn't reduce our consumption of plastic to begin with, where the sheer volume of material we're producing is unsustainable, full stop. So with this point of overconsumption of materials in mind, how can we begin to curb our reliance on single-use plastics and cut plastic pollution at the source? Now, as part of our charity, we always advocate for a collaborative approach to tackling single-use plastic, working together as companies, governments, and individuals to make the urgent changes needed to reduce our plastic consumption. Firstly, companies need to clean up their act and stop the incessant greenwashing around plastics and recycling and cut down their single-use plastic production. Governments play an important role in this too. They have the power to put pressure on companies to take responsibility for their plastic waste. This comes through taxes on plastic production for corporations or fines for not including recycled plastic in their packaging. The good news is actions like these are beginning to take effect. Governments around the world are starting to take steps to regulate plastic production, but it's often too little, too late. And no amount of legislation or targets are useful unless they are properly enforced and actually bring about change. Globally, we need to elect and push for governments to hold companies accountable to the waste that they produce. And when it comes to getting companies to change, we also can't underestimate the impact of consumer demand. Now, if we stop buying plastic items where we can, companies will have to change or they'll lose business. We as consumers play an important role in tackling plastic pollution. We have the power to make large-scale change and therefore effective and powerful action through our own choices, changes, and collaborations together. Plastic pollution is a collective problem that arises from a misuse of single-use plastic. Many of us are part of the problem, but that importantly means that we can be a part of the solution. And when we don't see the definitive action necessary from governments and companies to reduce plastic pollution now, we need to take things into our own hands and realize the huge difference that we can make as individuals. When looking at issues like plastic, it can be really huge and overwhelming, as it's easy to think how little and insignificant our own actions can seem, but we often forget how accumulative this action is. Here's an example. So every person in the UK, where I'm from, uses an average of over 100 plastic bottles each year. Just imagine the positive impact that one person cutting that unnecessary plastic item from their life would have. That's 100 less plastic bottles potentially polluting the planet or funding the production of more single-use plastic. And these individual changes are only amplified in impact when others join in. That's why we came up with this idea of a plastic clever lifestyle as part of our charity. Because in theory, being plastic free is a great way to live a more eco-friendly life, but cutting all single-use plastic from your life is a lot harder than it sounds. Supermarkets are often full of plastic, and buying plastic-free alternatives can be really difficult or expensive. Cutting all that from your life can be overwhelming for many people and put them off taking any action against plastic at all. In reality, what we really need is lots of people doing something to combat plastic pollution, not someone doing everything. Now, our idea of being plastic clever in your life is a simpler and more achievable version of being plastic free and an encouraging stepping stone to bigger action to reduce plastic consumption. And plastic clever means cutting what we call the big four plastic polluters from your life: single-use plastic cups and lids, straws, bottles, and bags. Now, these items may sound insignificant, but the crazy thing is they're still being found in the top 10 of ocean plastic pollutants, outnumbering items in some cases like plastic fishing line, despite mainly being used on land. They're also, for most people, really easy to avoid through the use of reusable alternatives like a reusable shopping bag or a bottle of water. Now, the concept of plastic clever is achievable for individuals, families, cafes, businesses, festivals, schools, and more. And we are working to help change all of these sectors to become plastic clever and make this simple change. Now, we initially started with cafes. We went marching into our local cafes with clipboards and criteria and convinced them in person to encourage customers to cut down plastic and become plastic clever. And this was really successful, with one cafe even saying that they saved money by not buying lots of stock of plastic straws and similar items. Our Plastic Clever Businesses initiative, which we developed next, encourages businesses to do the same, encourage employees to have their coffees in their own reusable mugs, and supply free tap water instead of just selling plastic bottles. We think it's just as important for a business to be environmentally conscious behind the scenes as well as through their product or service, and it's also an easier place to start. And finally, our Plastic Clever Schools initiative is specifically aimed at schools and students. It's about encouraging students to bring in a reusable bottle for water, or about using wooden or metal cutlery for school meals. Simple changes to reduce the school's use of plastic. The aim is that it can be easily implemented by students as part of eco teams or in collaboration with teachers, and we have over 1,100 schools signed up to this scheme around the UK so far. The good news is, being plastic clever is a change that you can make too, starting today. Because as Ella said at the start of our talk, the time for action to combat plastic pollution is now. It's all well and good to talk about the negative impacts of our plastic consumption, to draft targets and legislation, but what we really need is change being made with urgency. And we all have a part to play in that. Now, an acquaintance of ours, a professor at Plymouth University here in the UK, has a really good analogy for our plastic waste crisis. If plastic pollution were an overflowing bathtub, the solution wouldn't be to try and mop up the spilling water as it flows over the edges. The solution would be to turn off the tap. And that's exactly what we need to do. Cut our plastic consumption at the source and turn off the plastic tap. Thank you very much.
By plastics could be this much serious. For the environment of our planet, I think we all should try to cut down on plastic in our daily lives to give bigger help, like Amy and Ella. 저는 기조 강연을 들으면서 지구 환경을 위해 일상생활에서 무분별하게 사용되는 플라스틱을 줄여야겠다는 생각이 들었습니다.
I agree with you too. 5 minutes later, a group discussion will be held among participants. Those who are participating in the discussion, please go to the appropriate meeting room. Others can also observe the discussion, so please stay with us. 5분 후에 그룹 토론이 이어집니다. 일반 참가자분들도 토의를 시청할 수 있으니 저희와 계속 함께 해주세요.
이제 저희는 작별 인사를 드려야 할 시간입니다. It is time to say goodbye.
We'll meet you again at the closing ceremony on Friday, July 30th at 10 a.m. Korea Standard Time.
Please enjoy the discussions. Thank you. 30일에 뵙겠습니다. 감사합니다. See you on the 30th.